سلامونه خدای دې وکړي چې ټول به جوړ اوسئ په خیر راغلی او موږ به خپل پروګرام اوس شروع کړو که چیرې دوستان آماده یئ. Hello everyone. Our session would be in English and Farsi. My name is Habiba Ashna and I will be moderating the program today. Our session would be about the complex of humanitarian aid, accountability and effectiveness. We will discuss and analyze its effectiveness and also discuss about the politicization of humanitarian aid that's happening right now. Our guests are Mr. Michael Semple, former Deputy Envoy, EU Envoy for Afghanistan, Ms. Zahra Joya, founder of Rukhshana Media, Dr. Sarajuddin Isar, researcher, Radboud University from Netherlands, Fardin Hashemi, director of the Afghanistan Development Studies, and we also requested to have another speaker, another expert in our panel today. Based on our request, we have Mr. Shoaib Rahim, who is an associate professor at the American University of Afghanistan. He previously served in various public sector capacities as mayor of Kabul, deputy chief of finance for the Ministry of Defense. He was also a member of the delegation supporting the Doha negotiations between the Republic and the Taliban negotiations team. So we hope you will enjoy our discussion today. We will begin. I will start by asking a question from Mr. Michael Semple. Before we go to humanitarian aid, let's discuss the humanitarian crisis that we are actually facing in Afghanistan right now. So the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan right now are man-made crises. But the international society refused to recognize that as a man-made crisis, and they continue to send humanitarian aid without having any sort of accountability in that. How do you stop the crisis before we even think about sending the aid, the man-made crisis? And what are the effectiveness? How effective is humanitarian aid in a situation when it's a man-made crisis?
خب علی چطور کنیم؟ اول ما پرسان کنیم از دوستان عزیز صدای ما میرسه؟ صدا میرسه علی خوب میرسه انشاءالله؟ علی چطور که علی مشروع میکنم امرای دوستا علی ما چی داری گذار کنیم یا با اشاره انشان ولی انگلیسی دلی ما نمیشه خیلی ما رو مجبور بسازه که من ما انگلیسی گپ میزنیم ولی تشکر با دل خوشی کوته ما بگیم همون چیزی که شما پرسان کنید نممکن است علی چطور شده میتونه علی هم اینجا ما شما کلیگی میفهمم که امی باران که افغانستان فعلا که از اون باران تیر میشه سر افغانستان تیر هم میشه این طبعا تعلق داره با آمدن ما طالبان نمیگم با امی نظام که اونا میگن امارت اسلامی در که نه اسلامی است نه امارت ولی برحال اما نظام بایسازی شد که باران ایجاد شود او با دادن چند بوجی گندم همین مشکلات رفع میشه اما شده نمیتونه غیر ممکن است لحاظا در خودم هر وقت که ما فرصت داشته باشیم که امرای پالیسی سازا که بشینیم یا بالاخره اینکه گوش اونا رو بگیریم یک چیزی مطالعه نوشته کنیم ما نمیگیم که کمکی بشارت کاتو کنی ما میگیم که بیا سر موضوعات اصلی بیا سر امو بالاخره موضوع عنوان از این کنفرانس که خوشی ما آمد اما یک فکر سر آینده افغانستان اون نظام که جاینشینی نظامی در ناکامی امارت در سرزو فکر کنی که رای اینی که طبعا رای حالی اصلی برای مردمی آفرزاده افغانستان او چیز است او تا که افغانا نرسه با اون نظام که مشکلات و اشتباهاتی هم داری امارت هم داری جمهوریت که بود دکتر با اجازه شاکر شما است بود بعض مشکلات که اما این نظامی آینده که هر دوشان رفع کنه یا از اون تجربه تلخ و شیرین استفاده کنه تا اون وقت فکر حکیم است بچارگی حکیم است خب از نقطه نظری این چیزی که ما میگیم که این دلیل شده نمیتونه که دفتن این کمکی بشاری که قطع کنی ولی اتصال سوال جواب هم میخوایی ما بسیار مختصر است همین میگیم وقت کم است ولی با اجازه دکتر یک کیسه میکنم یک کیسه کنیم ما در این کیسه افغانستان نیست کسی عراق است بعد از اولین جنگ خلیج چند سال بعد ما حیاتی رفتیم برای بررسی از برنامه کمک اونجا طرفی از مؤسسات که کار میکردن ما را گفتم که بررسی کنی که کار که ما انجام دادیم آیا نتیجه داد ادامه بدیم یا خیر تغییر استقامت یا نه دلشان بود که ما جوابی مثبت بدیم دلشان بود که ما بگیم که شاباش مردمی فقیر و مصیبت زده عراق که خیلی مستفید شدن از کمکتان یعنی که ادامه بدیم ولی همچنان اون گفتی که ما بسیار مردمی اصولی هستیم هر برنامه که ما که تطبیق کنیم باید با اساسی که اصول باشه مقصد که همین طبعا موضوع جندر حقوق زنان بود که موضوع که اعتصاب و حسابدهی هم بود موضوع پایدار بودن sustainability هم مطلب همه از چیزا بود و همچنان که مردم سالاری شمولیتی که جامعه و مردم در سلسله کمک رسانی همه از چیز بود هر جایی که ما رفتیم ما دیدیم که زمین مساعد نبود برای کار مطابق اصول که اونها به ما گفتن که اساسی ما است رفتم در اونجا در قسمتی جنوب اون جایی که میگه در مارشلند اون جایی که در علی در اون دیارم رفته که علی در اون طرفی نمروز جای شما چی میگه که طرفی نزدیک به سیستان اونجا همی چی میگه اون جایی که درست نیم آبی است برحال این در نه همی یک برحال جایی که در اصل زندگی مردم سری آب است زمین تقریبا هیچ زمین نیست برحال اونجا که رفتم راستی آبی نوشیدنی نداشتن ولی اصولا کلی اینی که مایگیریشان و طرز زندگیشان تعلق داشت با آب کسی آب سرشان قطع کرد ما رفتم دیدن انجینیر دیدن مسئولی اینی که آبیاری پیش ما بود از حکومت عراق بود اینی که ما ازش پرسان کردم آقا صاحب میتونی با ما بگی که نهر شما چرا خشک است و خطا میشه بگی های شما ما نمیفهمید و گفته که خاطر جان باشی میفهمید خوب است شکر است که شما میفهمید پس ما با مؤسسات گفتیم که جایی که کستن دولت برای خراب ساختن نظام زندگی مردم آب سرشون قطع میکنی شما بوتلای آبی نوشیدنی تقسیم میکنی فضول است پیدا میگی الان که میرم مقصد میگه که ما کمیونیتی ایژوکیشن داریم میرم کسی که معروفی میشه با مناسب سرمالم یونیفرم دار در که سلای کامری پشش او امیتر میگه علی مسئولی که کمیونیتی دیولپمنت این آقا صاحب است تکرار زمانی که خلقی و پرچمی که مشهور بود هاری که سرماله باید جانی که توفان باید میده برحال ما فقط استثناء گفتیم که در کردستان که رفتیم حلبجا رفتیم بسیار وضع خراب بود که بذریعه گاز قتلیام کرده بود و به نام انفال اونها همه کاریجات خراب ساخته بودن اونجا فاز آزادی بود در اونجا در پشمرگه زمین مساعد ساختن که بدون مداخلت مؤسسات میتونست هر جای بره و راستی مطابق اصول کار پیش ببره نتیجه دادم در این شرایطی ظلم که مشاهده میشد کاری کمک رسانی مطابق اصول غیر ممکن کردستان میگه کار میکنی اونجا میشه در افغانستان عین شرایط حاکم است در برای فعلا اگر از نقطه نظری beneficiary lists که تعیین کردن مستقیم طالب باید حقی گفتنی خود داشته باشد مقرری پرسنل که طالبا باید که حقی معرفی کردن داشته باشد تعیین که قراردادی ها طالب باید بودن معرفی کنن و علی وقت آمد که اونها که بودن در این مؤسسات را در قبضه خود بگیرن و مقصدی که علی شروع کرده ما شما از موضوع زنه حق ندارن که کار کنن در سلسله کمک رسانی بدون زی استثنای بسیار مختصر که میگه سکتری که صحیح و که سکتری تعلیم و تربیت او هم خیلی محدود و با تفاوت با زمان اول این قوانین و مقررات تطبیق میشه که این سختی نبود در امارات اول ما دیدیم لحاظا کار کردن با مطابق اصول که همه ارگان ها بیان میکنه برای فعلا ناممکن
تشکر بسیار زیاد. من میخوایم بگویم که در یاد دارم اما متاسفانه یکم لهجه دارم و لهجه پشتو دارم خدا کنه که دوستا بعدا انتقاد نکنند. زمان بلا بخونه در دکتر صاحب ایسار څخه ده دکتر صاحب بشری راستی موږ تاسو په دې باندې بحث کړی دی قبلا ما با هم صحبت کردیم درباره کمک‌های بشردوستانه که به افغانستان میره و تقریبا بیلیون ها دلار است از که این بیلیون ها دلار امریکا تقریبا تا به اکتبر 2023 تقریبا 2 بیلیون دلار 2 بیلیون دلار تمام از امریکا روان کرده نزد به افغانستان. آیا امی کمک‌های بشردوستانه در اقتصاد افغانستان کمک میکنه یا نه؟ زبخونه غواړم زه پښتنه بیرته په پښتو کې کومه چې ډاکټر صاحب ما پښتو پوه شي که چیرې په فارسي نه وي پوه شوی آیا بشري مرستې د افغانستان د اقتصادي پرمختیا کې مرسته کوي که نه او که کوي نو څومره؟
Thank you very much, but I will shift in English because my co wanted to practice his Persian, but I want to practice my English. I think that is a very paradoxical question. But before I address that question, I just would like to quickly provide an overview of what is going on to the Afghan economy, because there have been a lot of campaigns, and of course there have been a lot of efforts, particularly in the West, including the US and other colleagues, that the Taliban at least are doing good with respect to the economy. And they would refer to deflation, the minus 9% that we see right now, the revenue that they have been kind of generating, and of course corruption, the rampant corruption that existed in the previous government, which I do agree the rampant corruption was there, but I don't buy the kind of argument that the Taliban are not corrupt. So just quickly, I'll just begin by how the economy is performing. So the very key aspect of economy is the real sector, what we call it, which is very much the national income or the domestic GDP, gross domestic product. So if you read reports by UNDP, by World Bank, who at some point kind of been campaigning to Taliban in favor of them, so 1/3 of that economy is all gone. So with the abrupt cut-off, foreign aid to Afghanistan, so another 8 billion just gone away, disappeared. So that would kind of constitute like 20% of the Afghan economy with the 20 billion. So if I just, economists normally talk about figures and statistics because numbers talk. In 2021, the GDP decreased by 20.7%. These are all World Bank figures. And back in 2022, it again further kind of deteriorated by another 6.2%. So technically, we are losing 1/3 of GDP. That has a direct impact on employment, which is a very core objective of many governments, hunger, and of course the poverty rate. I don't want to go to the figures because I know all of you know the situation, how it's going on there. Taliban have been thinking that they are doing good because they have been collecting a lot of revenue, which I agree they have, but they forget, even though I know some of my former colleagues are working with them, but I don't know why they do not listen to them. We are at recession, recruited. So when you are at a recession, you can't tax people. You have got to reduce tax or disappear the kind of rate that you have both at the customs level and also at the revenue level. But Taliban are just coercing the people, asking them to pay no matter what. There is a very important element in the literature when you talk about taxation. There has got to be a reciprocity. What I mean by reciprocity, so tax has to perform like a contract between the government or the tax collector, whoever it is, the authoritarian government of the Taliban, and the taxpayer. And that was the mechanism that worked in the Western European context and in many countries. So that reciprocity means the kind of social contract. So when you tax people, you have got to provide services. And Taliban today provide services. There is nothing, no whatsoever report of where the money they collect, the 2 billion. They collect about 2 billion a year. It's more or less, so Mr. Rahimi's hair, there's more or less about the same amount that the Republic was kind of collecting over the years. So Taliban have kind of did not collect a lot of revenue, but of course with the economy that is shrinking, so that is huge. I don't want to go into the details because of the time and because of the technicality. I leave it to the Q&A. And so Taliban governments at that kind of recession, they have got to pursue expansionary policies. Expansionary policy means they have got to reduce taxes, they have got to reduce at the fiscal, at the monetary level, which is the banking system, the interest rate. Now the Taliban say that interest is haram and they do not allow it. So when the interest is, I agree it is haram, but what is going on with Islamic banking? I used to work with the central bank for many years, and I remember what we have done, it is still there. And with the legislation, with the legal framework, and I think what exactly one of the people who have been working in the legislation sector, they know that there have been a lot going on. So what is the transition from the conventional banking to the Islamic banking? Zero, nothing. I think last March, they said that all commercial banks have to come up with the guidelines, and there is none. So out of all 12 banks, we have only 7 banks operating. And the banks, what they're doing basically, they're just recipients or receivers of money that the community, diaspora community, yourselves, that you send to your families, friends, and that's what the bank do. And that's what the bank do also with regards to paying the salaries or whatever to whoever is kind of being paid. So the main core of the banking, which is to take money, give money, and make money, is disappearing. So what I mean by that, basically the lending, the loan, which is like key to the flourishing of the banking industry, does not work there. I know in a developing context that could take years because we know the Kabul Bank scandal, and I don't want to go into that. But you have to go in order to support investment, production, all employment. You have got to kind of reduce the interest rate, which we call them open market operation. And they don't do it because and I'm sure I have colleagues within the monetary policy department of the central bank. They know the business, they know the deal, but they don't do it. They say, okay, no, we don't do it. So, and that brings us to the kind of deflation that the Taliban have been very much in the past few months, if not weeks, campaigning. And that is the minus 9% deflation. I think one thing they don't understand, there is a difference between deflation and disinflation. So disinflation means when you have positive inflation, but it's still a little bit down, but disinflation means coming things below the zero. So the minus 9% is good for the consumers, for mustahlikin, masraf kunandar, but it is not good in a longer term for the private sector. friends of mine who have been in the business industry perhaps very well know. And that again kind of fuels investment and businesses and employment. And and also Taliban have also been kind of pushing or pursuing very tough policies with regards to the banking or financial system, let's put it that way. They impose very tough measures on the capital notes, on the capital flights, so nobody can allow or allowed to take away certain amount of money out of the country. And I think you guys know about the $200 withdrawal that was kind of allowed for every single individual or every single bank account holder. So they will not allow. And also I think for the corporates it was like 600. And Hibatullah has been issuing in loudspeakers with his colleagues decrees one after the other that use and bringing the FX or foreign currency in the daily transaction is not allowed. So that is forbidden, that is haram. So you can't use. This is good initiative, but we have got to understand that does it work? They received 10 billion Afghani bells last year from Poland. And I don't know where is that money going on, and I don't know why they're pushing it. And also, again, that is impacting. Of course, it's contributing to the deflation. To the cash shipment, I think that is perhaps one of your favorite topics, so cash shipment there have been a lot of paradoxes going on. Unfortunately, neither the United Nations, there are 18, 16, 17, correct me if someone knows the exact figures of their affiliate NGOs, International Non-Governmental Organization, and NGOs, non-governmental organizations, so they have been kind of closely working. And I think UN was type of favoring with the expenditure of the money that is being injected. Now, where the money goes and how the Taliban access. The UN has been issuing statements that this money does not go to the hands of the Taliban. But if it is not going to the hands of the Taliban, one could argue, why the currency is so stable? Because they do exactly the same thing that we used to do for 20 years, selling dollars in the local market so that we can observe excessive Afghan currency in the market. And they know it, and they exactly do the same thing. So now the question is how they access. UN says they don't access because the money goes to the AIB Bank, Afghanistan International Bank, the very darling bank of the international community, even those days we call it. So how they do, there are several arguments, and the kind of assumption I had, I got it certified with some people who work with the Ministry of Finance. So the money goes to the AIB Bank, the 40 million, and then it will have to be converted to local currency. So the kind of capacity that the central bank has, none of the commercial banks nor the Sarajuddin. So they have to convert. Because of that Hibatullah's decree, the money will indirectly go to the hands of the Taliban because of the conversion. And finally, there's something called reserve requirement. They ask all the banks to bring their deposits in foreign currency in the bank, and they have increased it. I can talk more later.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sepp. I know there are a lot of issues with the humanitarian aid, and I'm pretty sure we can talk about it a lot. So thank you so much. We will be asking you more questions. But before we move ahead, actually I want to ask Zahra another question. Zahra, humanitarian crisis affects the women's rights directly. Humanitarian aid going to Afghanistan prolongs the fight of the Afghan woman for equality because it's a very political thing. How do you suggest Afghan women fight in such a situation? What should we do?
It's a pleasure to be here. So I prefer to speak Persian because I'm not in the good mood to speak a second language. So زیادی وجود دارد که در 2 سال گذشته طالبان به صورت بی‌پیشینه زنان و کودکان را از صحنه عمومی کاملا حذف کرد و کمک‌های بین‌المللی هم بر اساس آخرین گزارشی که از طرف سیگار نشان رسید نشان داد که طالبان به صورت وحشتناک تحت عنوان‌های مختلف به عنوان زنان بی سرپرست در هر جا نهاد ایجاد کرده، در هر جا از مردم حتی چی میگیرن؟ فساد، در واقع فساد جریان داره، فساد از مردم باج میگیرن، باجگیری میکنن. بعد بر اساس آخرین گزارش سازمان کمک‌های بین‌المللی دفتر سازمان ملل در کابل اوچا بیش از 4 میلیون کودک و مادر در افغانستان دچار تغذیه حاد هستند و این وضعیت وحشتناک است به دلیل از اینکه طالبان کمک‌ها را دریافت می‌کنند برغم اینکه سازمان ملل و دیگر نهادهای بین‌المللی همیشه اعلام کرده که کمک‌ها به دست طالبان نمی‌رسد. ولی شواهد زیاد وجود داره که به دست طالبان می‌رسد. زنان بدون محرم اجازه ندارند که بیرون از خانه برند، زنان اجازه ندارند که با وکیل گذر با مجراهایی که برای دریافت کمک ایجاد شده با مردم جلسه داشته باشند، درخواست کمک کنند. و این دلیل رو فکر می‌کنم که تأثیرات محدودیت هایی که طالبان علیه زنان و کودکان وضع کرده بسیار تأثیر عمیق داره روی از اینکه زنان و کودکان که آسیب پذیرترین گروه هست و در عین حال اینا کمک ها بخش کلان از کمک ها زیر نام زنان و کودکان به افغانستان وارد میشه ولی اونا دریافت کننده اصلی نیستن و این واقعا یک نگرانی جدی است. و به این خاطر ما فکر میکنم که چند موضوع را ما باید مورد بحث جدی قرار بدیم و مردم باید در نظر بگیرن. این که پذیرش هزینه ستم پذیری به مراتب بیشتر از دشواری‌های عدالت خواهی است و زنان افغانستان در 2 سال گذشته به شدت مبارزه کردند، زندان‌های شکنجه‌گاه‌های طالبان را تجربه کردند ولی هنوز هم صدای ما صدای عدالت‌خواهی ما سرکوب میشه در داخل افغانستان، حتی بیرون از افغانستان. زنان در جاهای مختلف مورد حمله و هدف قرار میگیره و این وحشتناک است. بعد فکر میکنم که در ما به خاطر از اینکه بتانیم تأثیر کمک‌های جامعه جهانی روی زندگی زنان و کودکان افغانستان را ببینیم، یعنی احساس کنیم، چند موضوع را باید در نظر بگیریم. یک اینکه ما از تمام سازمان‌ها و به خصوص سازمان ملل که در رهبریت کمک رسانی به افغانستان حضور داره باید به شدت از اونا را پاسخگو بسازیم. از اونا باید ما یک سیستم شفاف بخواهیم، مکانیزمی که ما مطمئن شدیم که اینمی پول واقعا به زنان و کودکانی که نیازمند هستند و هر روز وضعیتشان فقیرتر میشه، بدتر میشه، با اونا میرسه. موضوع دوم ما بخواهیم باید که جلوی یک موضوع رو باید یادآور شد که کمک رسانی به افغانستان تحت هر نامی به نوعی خاک زدن به چشم مردم است. من فکر میکنم که با هر اتفاق تازه‌ای که در جهان رخ میده وضعیت افغانستان فراموش میشه و من فکر میکنم این موضوع سبب میشه که آمریکا کمک میکنه، اوکی، سازمان ملل کمک میرسانه به افغانستان، اوکی، ولی وضعیت را زیر شعاع قرار میده. وقتی اونا میگن که ما اینقدر کمک به افغانستان فرستادیم، ما اونا باید تأثیرات از این باید ببینیم. باید مردمی که در داخل افغانستان نان شب روز خود ندارن، مادرایی که حتی حالا متاسفانه بر اساس محدودیت‌های طالبان از در جاده ها اونا حق ندارن که گدایی کنن و گداها را در جمع میکنه طالبان. فکر میکنم که این موضوع را باید به صورت جدی مورد بحث قرار بدیم با تمام نهادها و کسانی که در رأس کمک رسانی به افغانستان قرار بدیم. موضوع سوم باید جلوی گسترش تروریسم بین المللی در افغانستان گرفته شود. این کمک‌ها مستقیم به دست کسانی قرار میگیره که اینا بسیار رابطه دارن با گروه‌های مختلف، گروه‌های کوچک، کلان در افغانستان فعالیت‌های تروریستی دارن.
I will pick up on what she actually said, and my next question would be for Mr. Shaibayi. Zahra said that the talking about human rights, the humanitarian crisis, and talking about humanitarian aid often is to diverge from the actual topic. UN General Secretary report, which recently was released, if you look at it, in one of the language used there, it says reintegrating the Afghanistan state, the Afghan state back. You were a member of the Doha delegation, you were there. My question to you is specifically, in that document, it emphasizes on women's rights, human rights, and all the rights that you could possibly think of to reintegrate the state of Afghanistan. But on the other side, it goes back and it talks about when it comes to security, it says the Afghanistan land is not being used against the terrorists. They completely talk about the narcotics and they deny that. Do you think the humanitarian aid and the human rights issue in Afghanistan right now is being used in a political way to actually diverge from the political crisis and the security crisis that Afghanistan is facing right now?
تشکر خانم آشنا. سلام به همگی. فارسی آقای مایکل ما را سر غیرت آورد، گفتیم ما اگر انگلیسی صحبت کنیم شاید کمی خوب به نظر نرسه، ولی من تلاش میکنم که هم فارسی و هم انگلیسی به سوال شما پاسخ بدم. من فکر میکنم ما شما باید چند اصل بپذیریم و برایت حقایق قضاوت بکنیم. وضعیت امداد رسانی و وضعیت کمک‌های انکشافی که به افغانستان و به طالبان فعلا صورت میگیره. بحث اول حس گناه غرب و حس گناه جهان است و حس شکستی که بعد از سقوط نظام به همگی دست داره. The sense of guilt and the shame of defeat of the international community is driving the current policy. What do I mean by that? Military defeat, and it was a defeat by any standard. It was an internal implosion, it was a withdrawal, you can characterize it however you like. But the military defeat of NATO and the West, and the collapse of the democratic order with all its flaws and all its problems, unfortunately, is now equated to a moral defeat. Meaning because we collapsed and because we lost the war, everything we did in the past 20 years was wrong. Our governance policy was wrong, our aid policy was wrong, our enforcement of accountability measures were wrong, our investment in the education of a future generation was wrong. And we see this very strange duality when it comes to engaging the Taliban by the international community and the donors, where the Republic was requested to account for every single cent in high-level international platforms, in internal domestic meetings, and conditions and criteria of aid was enforced. The same donors very easily forego the same conditions for the Taliban. Why? This question and this conversation is not easy. Usually the response we get from policy folks in DC, whether it's the World Bank or whether it's the aid community is, well, Afghanistan is a difficult conversation. All we're trying to do is prevent a humanitarian catastrophe. And that's a blanket excuse. What do you mean a humanitarian catastrophe? We're not asking you to stop all funding and support to the 40 million people who are living in Afghanistan. That is not the conversation. The conversation is when you send the funds, when you continue the program to support the people, be it in education, be it in agriculture, be it in first aid, why aren't you asking whether or not that money is actually reaching the beneficiaries that it's intended to go to? I mean, if these donor countries, which are democratically elected, are accountable to their taxpayers, where is that accountability? There is a convenience of Afghanistan fatigue. People don't want to hear about Afghanistan. Oh, that problem still exists. The Biden administration, when you hear the word Afghanistan, it's like we say, it's like Jinnu Bismillah. When you use the word Afghanistan, everything shuts down. People discard it, swipe it under the rug. That is the reality. But we have to continue highlighting the fact that what are the consequences of lack of accountability towards the current aid that is going to the de facto authorities, which John Sopko's recent report highlighted, and he keeps on bringing it up in many different platforms. The consequence of this policy is that the people of Afghanistan, the political actors, whichever remain or whichever are relevant, and the region, Central Asia and the region as a whole, sees the current aid policy from a political lens. Meaning, as your question pointed to, this money has multiple functions and multiple purposes. The most important one, or probably one of the most important ones, is to buy the loyalty of the Taliban. There is a competition in the region and with the US on having the ear of the Taliban decision makers. It cannot be explicit. The Doha deal constantly comes up as a legal document, but it is very loosely interpreted by the American administration, by the current Biden administration. But the actual geopolitical calculation that is happening from the eyes of the region and from the eyes of the people of Afghanistan is that, well, the Americans and the Europeans are giving the Taliban hush money, or giving the Taliban money to at least be on our side. And the way the region interprets this is, well, the Taliban are now the new contractors of the West. And so what that does is, it puts them in a bit of a race. Well, we have to also have good relations with the de facto authorities, so we will also grace them with our money. We will also find friends in Kandahar and in Kabul, in those administrations. Accountability is out the window. They don't really care if the money goes to the people or not. So this donor industrial complex has a very ugly side to it, which the donor community conveniently does not discuss, but the beneficiaries and the recipients always do. And that is the politicization of aid. The question is, okay, what needs to happen? Well, difficult conversations need to take place. Is the solution readily available? No, it is not. No, it is not. Is Afghanistan dependent on this aid? Yes, it is. How can we reduce the negative impact of this cash flow into the coffers of the Taliban while trying to make sure that the 40 million people benefit from it by eventually, slowly, gradually introducing measures of accountability? Just ask a simple question. We sent you $20 million, $40 million last week. What did you do with it? And unfortunately, because these questions are not being asked, a vicious cycle, we're now entering a new vicious cycle where there is only short-term, these are short-term policies. And unfortunately, we are inside a tunnel, inside a process where there will be a political overhaul, and the donor industrial complex and the current aid policy is unfortunately empowering all the negative consequences and risks. I'll stop there.
Now you know why we requested him to come here special. Dr. Said, I have a question for you. Does the humanitarian help, which we often hear as an excuse from the Taliban, help in the development? That's my question, and that's what we want to know, because we have heard it many, many times from the Taliban that the humanitarian aid is helping them in the development process right now.
تشکر. من سعی می‌کنم که به 7 دقیقه صحبت‌هایم تمام کنم. من بخوام صحبت‌هایم در واقع با یک مثال شروع کنم. شاید بعضی از دوستان با او آشنا بشن. فرض کنیم که فعالیت سازمان ملل در جلسه رسیدن به اهداف SDG یک کشور. UNHCR یا یونیسف در یک کشور اروپایی کمپانی را می‌اندازه که به ازای هر جفت کفشی که شما می‌گیرید، در جفت کفش در واقع در کشور توسعه یافته شما می‌گیرید. در عمل در واقع شما یک کار بسیار بشردوستانه دارید انجام میدید. ولی سوال اینست که وقتی شما به عنوان مثال 1 میلیون تن گندم به یک کشور کمک میکنید از طریق سازمان ملل، چی بلای سر زراعت کشور میاد؟ به روز زارعی که در واقع گندم میکنید. پاسخ واضح است. بعد از 1 سال شما چنین کمکی دریافت کنید، نتیجه مشخص خواهد بود که او زراعت از بین خواهد رفت و در واقع شما به نحو گرسنگی در کشور تبدیل می‌کنید، چون صنعت و زراعت در واقع در کشور برای تولید گندم از بین رفته. افغانستان بیشتر از 40 سال است که سازمان ملل اون فعالیت‌های بشردوستانه رو انجام میده. بحث دیگری که با این مثال ما می‌خوایم پیش ببریم صحبتمه، بحث اهداف SDGs است که سازمان ملل دو کار می‌کنه از سال 2015 و اهداف مشخصی در افغانستان پیگیری است. ما کمک‌های زیادی در دوره جمهوریت دریافت کردیم که به کاهش فقر منجر شد. ولی به محض که جمهوریت فرود باشی، شما در اهداف توسعه پایدار یک بحران در افغانستان شایستید. به عنوان مثال جندر اکوالیتی به عنوان یک هدف پنجم که در SDGs مطرح شده است. زیرو هانگر به عنوان در واقع جزء اهداف اولیه است که تحقیق شده است. کاهش فقر جزء مواردی است که در افغانستان کم شده بود، ولی به محض که شما توجه جامعه جهانی از افغانستان از دست دادین، فقر در افغانستان حدود 90% رسیده. گرسنگی به عنوان یک امر متداول در بین مردم افغانستان در شرایط خاصی است. زمانی که من مسئولیت در حکومت داشتم، یک از کارهایی که می‌خواستم بگیره این بود که اجنسی‌های سازمان ملل متحد در قالب وان بجت رفتار کنند. پالیسی‌های در واقع مالیشون رو تطبیق کنند و در قالب پاسخگو باشن به حکومت افغانستان. تجربه موفقش ما به عنوان مثال در ویتنام داشتیم و سازمان ملل اونجا در قالب یک وان بجت رفتارها و فعالیت‌هایش رو تنظیم کرد. اما چیزی که من شاهد بودم شخصاً این بود که متأسفانه مسیرهای مختلف اجنسی‌های سازمان ملل تحقیق می‌کردن تا به این اصل اساسی ما دست پیدا کنیم. در حالی که ما میشه گفت یک حکومت مشروط داشتیم و از لحاظ بین‌المللی او استانداردهای بین‌المللی رعایت می‌کرد. حالا سوالی که برای من خلق میشه و در واقع بحث رو می‌سم خلق کردم است که اگر ما خواسته باشیم در قالب SDGs در افغانستان صحبت کنیم، سازمان ملل به هیچ کدام از این اهدافش نزدیک نشده بوده در دوره جمهوریت. و برعکس شرایط حاضر کمک میکنه برای درخواست منابع مالی بیشتر در سازمان ملل که به باور دون شفافیت کامل با توجه به شرایطی که در افغانستان هست وجود نداره. نکته دیگه که شرایط بدتر میسازه ایست که طالبان به عنوان یک رژیمی که دفکتو شناخته میشن طبیعتاً نمیتونن اون حسابرسی از اجنسی سازمان ملل بگیرن. بنابراین یک فرضیه اینجا میتونه مطرح بشه که من به عنوان یک سوال مطرح بشه، یعنی به عنوان یک امر تثبیت شده و بحث من میخوایم با اون تمام کنم. او ایست که آیا منافع اقتصادی فردی یا گروهی در اجنسی سازمان ملل میتونه روی دیدگاه سیاسیشان در خصوص گروه طالبان تاثیرگذار باشه یا نه؟ طرحهایی که داره ارائه میشه به باور من میتونه تا حدودی نزدیکی نشان بده و این برای آینده سیاسی مردم افغانستان به باور من خطر جدی است. و بنابراین یک از اصول اساسی که من تصور بر است که ما به توسعه در افغانستان نزدیکتر می‌سازه بر اساس اهدافی که سازمان ملل مطرح ساخته است که بحث حسابرسی اجنسی سازمان ملل با توجه به شرایط حاضر با جدیت بیشتر پیگیری شود. تشکر.
تشکر بسیار زیاد. من سوال دارم از خانمایی که فعلا در اروپا مزایده میکنن و اونا سوال رو کردن برای آقای مایکل سمپل. If you don't mind, I will ask the question. Question is from a group of women who set up a sit-in protest in Europe, by the way. They're part of the coalition of the women in Afghanistan, and they continue to protest outside of Afghanistan and also raise their voices and request for the recognition of gender apartheid in Afghanistan. They say that the UN does not only help the Taliban with aid, it also helps them with tours in Europe. And the European governments also provide visas and halls where Taliban chant Allahu Akbar and long live the Taliban. This scares me as an advocate and protester and a victim of the Taliban prison. I am scared of them because I have received threats from the Taliban supporters, even though I am in Europe right now. What did EU do? Was anyone fired? We heard that they work with Al-Qaeda. Why is Europe still giving them platforms and not us? Mr. Semple, this is a question. I'm sorry, it's not related to humanitarian aid, but women who are fighting inside and abroad, I thought they deserved to ask their questions.
This time, let me answer in English. I think the question is extremely important, and it's extremely timely, and we should take it seriously and seek action. I do not believe that any UN agency or respectable assistance organization has a mandate to provide support or a platform to the Taliban and their Islamic Emirate, and if they're found doing it, they should be called out and they should be held accountable. So that and any case in which we find this happening, I'm confident that if it is called out, that a stop can be brought. There is always a case for dialogue, but not a dialogue which creates a platform for a party to the conflict to exploit, particularly a movement like the Taliban, which is engaged in all the things which we have been talking about here. So, well done for calling this out. I think that as far as I understand the conditions in every single European country, there will be legislators who will be quite happy to join in the process of calling this out, because no parliament has given their government a mandate to allow their aid agencies or allow the UN to support the UN in providing a platform to the minorities in Europe. And I think that this is something which we're only seeing the start of. This is a threat which will be important to document and to be vigilant on, because there's been a long, and I'll take the luxury of a minute on this, that here we are this panel is talking about assistance, but I think it's good we've taken a holistic pattern related to the problem of the emirate and reaching the future better Afghanistan. That under the first emirate, the threat to international security, which ultimately provided the basis of UN mandates for interventions and led to the Republic was based essentially on this idea of bomb plots. That international terrorists sit in Afghanistan, run a bomb plot, send somebody, and there was a whole series of them. The biggest one was the hijacked planes for 9/11. Things have changed. Despite the theories from my dear friend Ambassador Khalilzad and others that the Taliban pursue what was jokingly called Islam in one country, like supposedly Stalin, unlike Trotsky, believed in communism in one country, that the Al-Qaeda was supposedly, they wanted the global jihad. The Taliban were confined to Afghanistan and therefore not a threat elsewhere. My research into the Taliban says that the mindset is totally different. The ambition is indeed one. The idea of the Amir al-Mu'mineen is Amir al-Mu'mineen, not Amiri Muslimani Afghanistan. They have ambitions to influence what happens beyond. They have ambitions to rework the Islamic world and to rework the relations with the non-Islamic world, the Dar al-Kufar. Their way for influencing need not be bomb plots. It can be affecting the conditions in Muslim countries and in European countries and trying to build up a support base there and encourage them to challenge the policies of the West in those countries, which ultimately, I say to Western countries, that is a threat to the stability of your society, to the cohesiveness of your society. So what our sisters have pointed out there, in a very specific context of Taliban providing a threat to them, is actually, this is part of the new world. This is part of the new threat, which is posed from the project of extremism being propelled in this network of jihadi madrasas now being established, benefiting from the revenue flows. All these integrate the economics that we're talking about. It's utterly horrifying, this idea that the Taliban have access to a budget of $2.3 billion, because, as we know, everything is fungible. That poor, misguided people around the world, have been jailed for providing terrorist finance when they send $500 to somebody who says he's doing jihad in Syria, and you go to jail in it. Catastrophic policy failure has provided a budget of $2.3 billion to the world's most successful extremist organization, and now our sisters are pointing out their outreach hitting to the heart of the West.
Thank you so much. I actually have a follow-up question on that. Regarding the Taliban apologists in Europe, and meanwhile, this is not my question, these are questions I'm receiving from the women who are in sit-in protest, by the way. Their question is, they are the Taliban apologists who raised their flag in Europe, and the German government was planning a meeting of Afghans for the Taliban. The same people also work and lobby for humanitarian aid in Europe, but they're never held accountable and the aid money continues to go. How does Europe deal with that, and why do people not see what's happening? That's not my question, Mr. Michael. Yes?
which is the Farsi. برای فعلا سیاست رسمی طی شده اتحاد اروپا و همچنان کشورهای اروپا بد نیست. اینا مسئولیت به دوش نمیگیرن که دوباره در افغانستان مداخله نیروی خود روان نمیکنن. به هیچ وجه طالبان را تایید نمیکنن. که امارت اسلامی را که به رسمیت نمیشناسن و هرچی مردم آوازه پخش میکنن این امکان پذیر نیست. ناممکن است در وضعیت فیزیک. ولی راستی عناصر وجود دارد. در طالبان در امارتی اول به نام خانم هلمز در که اونجا یک بالاخره این قراردادی طالبان بود چی در آمریکا طالبان میگشتن ولی که در تبلیغات به نفعشان میکردن بسیار سادگی بود خدا خانم نمیفهمید که چی مگذرد چی در افغانستان این کار کرد بدنام شده علی این مردم که این کار امداد هم میکرد بالاخره هم بدنام میشه ببینید که خوب بدنام میشه ما میگم که علی روشن فکرها صاحب نظر خواهر و برادر که اینجا جمع شدن کلگی نقش داره مقصد که علی دوستا که این سوال پرسان میکن علی خودش جزی رای حل است نظارت و همچنان که دادنی صدا با مردم داخل افغانستان که فعلا حقی آزادی بیان ازشان گرفته شد برای که باشن صدا دادن علی این گروه خانما که علی که امروز بیدار و فعال هستند در شبکه با اعتبار به مشکلات در کمک رسانی ما میگیم که از طالبان هم یاد میگیم در زبان که اونا شورش داشتن علی که جمهوریت در هم در کویتا هم در پشاور اونا تشکیل داشتن به نام کمیشنی زراعت هم داشتن کمیشنی صحی داشتن این که کمیشنی تعلیم و تربیه هم داشتن اگر نوجوانا که اینجا جمع هستن و فیران در شبکات که مسئول هستن که بیرون از افغانستان هستن برای نظارت سری که فعالیت ارگان کمک رسانی و همچنان وزارت خانه چی بقایجات وزارت خانه کاری نظارت باید به دوش نوجوانه که فیران بیرون هستن و آزاد هستن همزمان نظارت سری کاری فعلی و همچنان نقشه کشی برای پالیسی های سالم نظامی.
Thank you so much, تشکر بسیار زیاد. So this is a question I'm going to, anyone who can answer in the panel over here. The U.S. sends $80 million bi-weekly. Is there any mechanism to ensure this money does not end up in the pockets of the Taliban? And is it available for the public? Does public have access to know where the money is ending?
Well, I think this is a very complicated question, first of all, because once you are in a political limbo, and once you are not resolving the kind of political issue that you have at the moment, so how could you kind of make aid very effective? So there is a distinction between humanitarian assistance as opposed to our official development assistance. Now, John Sopko, the head of the SAGA, in a conference in Russia, said that the money is not going to the hands of the Taliban. And he said, he kind of answered your question indirectly. He said, humanitarian versus the cost. You want the people to survive? Some money will go to the hands of the Taliban. That means there is no way. And now, in the very recent report, again, Sagar says those who have got gun have the money. So that means that they were kind of influenced. And I think the kind of leverage that the international community have on aid is not working. If it were because of the kind of political agenda, I think first of all we should not forget that aid has two dimensions from the literature. So there are the developmental dimension, the 5 principles of aid effectiveness, ownership. I don't want to go into those technicalities, but aid has always been political. Unfortunately, and the history of aid-run terrorism, that's what we call it in the literature. In Afghanistan, it's not 40 years. It is 2 centuries. So that kind of dependency, you kind of name it as British subsidy, you're going to call it humanitarian assistance, you call it ODA, or whatsoever. So it is hard. And it is hard because if you are not coming into a kind of political agreement, consensus between the Taliban do not have legitimacy at the national level, the Taliban do not have legitimacy at the international level. So when that mechanism is not there, so the aid money, or whatever it is, humanitarian, it is very highly likely to go to their hands. And there is no report. There was one budget that the Taliban in the very early days, because they wanted to secure the international recognition, they put something on. And I had a conversation with the very senior officials from the Ministry of Finance, who is now in exile. And he said that Hibatullah is saying no more budget. Because if we do the budget, then we kind of allocating resources to different sectors. And by allocation of aid money to different sectors, our central control of the money will disappear. So he's still going into, and if you see this new report by the World Bank, of the $2 billion, or totally for the past 2 years, nearly $3 billion of UN cash shipment was made to the Taliban. So, and the kind of the budget, and the kind of revenue that the Taliban have been generating, 50% of that is spent on security. So what does that mean? So I don't remember figures at the top of my head, but I think it is Ministry of Interior. According to some resources, they have 161,000 troops. Michael perhaps have more information about that. What they do with the 161,000? Perhaps this is very paradoxical. Maybe do not have that many troops, but forget about the Ministry of Defense. So all the money is not going to the developmental purposes. It is going for the security or whatever money is being generated from whatever. And I also heard that Mullah Hibatullah has his own off-budget flow of aid from other countries, which we don't know. And that's why the 5% of the developmental that they spend on based on the World Bank report. So for instance, you see Koshtepa. For instance, you see the Salang Tunnel. So where does this money comes in? Not from the budget. It is from the Baxi Alabidora. مثل که مولا عمر در وقت صندوق مملو از پول نقد داشت یک پارچه میتر میگه برو اینا قبرزی بده از طرف امیر صاحب از طرف خدمت. So that sort of thing is still there.
ما میخوایم در ادامه صحبت‌های شما یک نقل قولی از آقای جانسپور اونجا بخونم براتون. گفته است که من میزان مداخله طالبان در روند توزیع کمک‌های بشری و ناتوانی سازمان ملل در حفاظت از برنامه‌های این سازمان در افغانستان را می‌دانم. یعنی واقعا این نگرانی در وجود دارد. من فکر می‌کنم چند موضوع باید مشخص در موردش صحبت شود. یکی اول اینکه هیچ کدام ما نمی‌خواهیم که کشور ما مورد تحریم قرار بگیرد، درست؟ بدون شک بسیار تاثیر عمیق داره، نگی که بر سر مردم که داخل افغانستان فعلا در محرومیت بسیار شدید زندگی میکنند و اینکه بلکه بر آینده کشور ما بسیار وحشتناک است. ولی حرف ما در کجاست؟ وقتی ما میخواهیم که شفافیت از سازمان ملل یا از دیگر نهادهایی که مسئولیت دارن کمک برسانه به است که بر ما مشخص کنند که طالبان کمک هایی را که دریافت میکنند از اون مدرسه جهادی نمیسازند که متاسفانه هر روز بیشتر شده. حالا بیشتر از 3,000 مدرسه جهادی در سراسر افغانستان تأسیس شده، حتی در دورترین نقاط افغانستان، جاهایی که طالبان مکاتب دختران را، مکاتب پسران را آتش دادن، تخریب کردن، ولی حالا مدرسه جهادی داره ساخته میشه و این پول هاست کجا میره؟ طالبان بسیار مردمان هوشیار است، اونا سرمایه‌گذاری میکنن روی ادامه ایدئولوژی خود در افغانستان و اینکه چطوری نسل بعدی را با این ایدئولوژیشون مطابق بسازند. موضوع دومی است که سازمان ملل یا تمام نهادهایی که صحبت میکنن حداقل گزارش ماهوار برای از اینکه مردم افغانستان مطمئن شوند که واقعا اینمی کمک‌ها بر ما میرسد و زندگی ما از اینمی کمک‌ها تأثیر میشه یا کم زر وضعیت ما بهتر میشه، بهبود پیدا میکنه، ما مطمئن شوم. ولی متاسفانه اون چیزی نیست. اصلا نهادها هست، رسانه‌ها هست. رسانه‌ها اکثریت خبرنگاران در داخل افغانستان نادک آزادانه فعالیت نمی‌کنند. مثلا وکیل گذر که در هر ناحیه، مثلا اگر شهر کابل در نظر بگیریم، در هر ناحیه کسی است که مسئول است که خانه‌های بی‌بضاعت را، خانواده‌ها یا زنان بی‌سرپرست را شناسایی کنند. ولی در این پروسه خودش یک کلان فساد وجود داره. زنانی که بالاخره سرپرست خانواده‌شان را در جریان این جنگ بسال در افغانستان از دست دادن، اونا دیگه اجازه ندارن که حتی با نوی وکیل گذری که از طرف طالبان مکلف شده که اونا را شناسایی کنه با اونا تماس بگیرن. و این واقعا وحشتناک است. این دسترسی گروه های آسیب پذیر به نهادهایی که کمک میکنن یا نهادهایی که کمک ها را نظارت میکنن بسیار محدود است. شما درست ما مثلا یک گزارش داشتیم از اینکه چطوری مواد بسیار گندیده شده را به مردم توزیع کرده بود و متاسفانه این روند همیشه جریان داشت. در طول 20 سال هم وجود داشته کمک‌هایی که تحت نام مردم افغانستان به افغانستان میره، ولی مردم اکثر اوقات از اون توزیع نمیشه. خیلی وحشتناک است.
تشکر بسیار زیاد زهرا جان. خب ما اگر کس سوال داره در آدینس میتونیم سوال رو بگیریم. بله آقای شبانی بفرمایید.
Thank you for the presentations. The assumptions seem to be that the West truly what it says, what it does, what it says is its intention. That is, the world has been subjected to trillions of dollars of aid, so-called aid, from the post-World War II till now. The situation in Gaza that we have just witnessed has been receiving aid for 75 years to stay in a prison that the West has been supporting. Is it really appropriate to call this aid or assistance? Or is it, as anthropologists have been writing for many years, it's the humanitarian war that is part of the hot war? We are, in fact, assuming and believing that the West is telling us the truth, that they are in fact aiding, but it is in fact part of their war. They're a two-pronged war. In Afghanistan, America spent $2 trillion in fighting a hot war. $2 trillion. And 80-something billion in so-called assistance, which was mostly stolen. So dollar is a weapon, just like rocket is a weapon. And furthermore, America is being defeated in Afghanistan. Is it truly the thing that they have shame and they have guilt and they do all of this because of their guilt and shame? Why a defeated country continues to pay the enemy that has lost $40 million a week? It doesn't make any sense. We really have to rethink the intentions and what's being said and what's being done and what its consequences are. This forum is on assistance. It's not on assistance, it's on humanitarian war. And if you conceptualize it as a form of war, you might come up with very different conclusions. Why do we have to accept the narrative that the West has been presenting us all the time, uncritically? It is time we need to think a bit more critically and see whether there is any difference between the hot war of dropping bombs and also dropping money.
Can we have a question, please?
Question is to everybody that I would like you to, is it possible to rethink what you were just discussing, or we should stay on that narrative for good?
I think that to try to be fair, I think we must recognize the shortcomings of the existing aid policy, which everybody has discussed, and the question that you, Professor Sharani, have pointed to. But I think it's difficult to judge intent. Unfortunately, when it has these qualities, where it's blind doling out of millions of dollars, triggers such question. Whether or not it's possible to rethink the narrative, I think the question should be asked, if the question is asked to citizens of Afghanistan, I think the citizens of Afghanistan have almost given up. The level of desperation and the level of dependency on this aid is beyond the collective capability to try to have any independent position. And that is the sad reality. In the 20 years of the Republic, people acted like there was a higher level of independent thinking. Now we know that that level of dependence was far less than we initially thought. Difficult conversations were not held before. If this question, the question of rethinking, was seriously taken into account between policymakers and decision makers in the past 20 years, it might have prevented the collapse, because it might have allowed for more courageous and bold decision making, forcing a more equal and more fair relationship with donors. Now, the last thing I'll say, not to drag this further, is to a point that Dr. Hashemi pointed to. If the intent of aid is to perpetuate dependency, we have to look at the Taliban as a group. What we hear from the aid community is, if the Taliban governance is dependent on this aid, we can alter behavior, we can change policy. Because if we then, after a few years, put a condition that we will reduce aid or we will stop aid only if you reopen the schools, only if you allow for a political process, only if you stop. That is what we hear, that this will create the right incentives. But that assumes that the Taliban care about what happens to 40 million people. The Taliban have demonstrated that they do not. The priority is members of the Taliban, the fighters, and their livelihoods and their income. And they are at most 100,000, at most, if you're very gracious. What we're seeing now, and the reports we're getting from the inside, is that a lot of the resource capture that is happening, a lot of the senior leadership and middle rank leadership, whatever resources they can get their hands on, they're taking it out of Afghanistan, either to Pakistan to buy assets, or to Dubai, or to the Gulf countries they have access to, because of the fear that this will be lost. So it's important to characterize the recipient of this aid in this conversation. The Taliban do not have a governance mindset. I would like to end with a quote by the Sheikh Hassan, the Prime Minister of the de facto authorities, last year when the initial pressures and the outcry of the economy was high. And he said that we have been chosen and tasked by God to end the occupation and introduce the Islamic Sharia in the land. The rest is up to God. That means don't come to us for governance, don't come to us for jobs, don't come to us for quality of life. That is not a part of our mandate. And so sending millions of dollars on a weekly basis to a leadership with this mentality cannot be interpreted as anything else but money to get them to push your agenda. And unfortunately, that is the reality that we have to deal with.
Thank you so much.
Let me continue the conversation. Ustad Sharami, thank you for the contribution. I think that all of us, every single one of us here, has an obligation to whichever constituency we serve, my university students and colleagues, to the people of Afghanistan, to evaluate the evidence, to make our observations and suggestions based on the evidence, and to interpret it in a transparent way, which can be challenged and improved on. When we come to this issue of aid dependence and understanding what the Taliban are doing, fundamentally, the Taliban are specialists in Bajgiri. They are extortionists. They are the world's best and most effective extortionists, and they did not militarily defeat the United States. I mean, that's bakwas. It's bakwas. I mean, the US had 12 casualties per year for like the past 5-6 years. That was not a military defeat. But there was a policy defeat, and ironically, the area that the Taliban were more successful than the Republic in, alas, was in public finance. Their version of public finance is extortion, Bajgiri. The $2.3 billion per year, approximately, depending on, of course, movements and exchange rates, that the Taliban get, it is primarily from the Afghan economy, and it is barge on the Afghan economy. It's not optimal tax rates, and although it can be accounted for, much of it in the same revenue system that operated beforehand. Your colleagues are operating the system. It is barge on every legal and illegal activity in the Afghan economy. The percentage contribution of external donors, whether they be Western or Eastern, whether they be our brothers from the Islamic Republic of Iran, who have previously provided operational finance, even some during the Republic era, and no doubt are generous contributors to the Sanduq under the Charpai of His Excellency Amir al-Mu'mineen. That is of course one source, and of course they will find some way of getting bodge from Western assistance, but the vast majority of the 2.3 billion is money they have taken from the Afghan people. And in my suggestion that the Nojawan, the experts here, should be involved in sectoral commissions, they should be a voice for the Afghan people to find out where that money has gone and propose better. I wanted to finish on this issue which always comes up, on the 40 million weekly or 80 million, the bi-weekly or 2 billion annually. This is not a contribution to the budget of the Emirate. It does not make any contribution to the 2.3 billion. If you had, of course, there is no shafafiyat. If we had this here behind us, of the 2.3 billion, we'd get from Madaniyat, most of it is from Gumruk. Nowhere will you find any contribution to that budget from the 40 million. The 40 million is a mechanism for providing the liquidity, the dollars cash into the Afghan economy, which is credited to the accounts, not of the Taliban, it is credited to the accounts of the aid actors who are part of the committee operating in New York and are then eligible to receive either dollars credited to their account that, according to the arrangement they have with their bank, they can draw on it once off or over a period of time, or they can have the equivalent amount of Afghanis credited, for which, as you know, Dr. Saab, there must be a foreign exchange auction. That they and that is, of course, where, of course, it is a contribution to the dollar liquidity. It is something which we know has been one of the contributions to the robustness of the Afghani exchange rate. It does not solely explain it. It does help explain what's happening with the exchange rate. It is not assistance to the Taliban. It is not a contribution to the budget. The budget is coming from the Afghan people. Of course, it is one factor which has meant it has helped stave off one kind of economic crisis, which is currency collapse. But now, of course, as you've explained, Afghanistan is living with another problem, which is the problem of deflation, which has its other side effects. But I want to absolutely clear, the United States and the United Nations are not providing assistance to the Taliban through the 40 million, and it is not a sign that somehow it is support of the Emirate, and it is not a sign that they're going to recognize it. We have many other problems, but not that one. There are many other reasons to criticize the United States and the UN and their failures, but let's focus on other things. The 40 million has been overused as a sign of supposed Western blessing for China. Very much.
فقط این قسمت آخر کپ مایکل رو قسمت شما استفاده مسئله چرمیدون که از درست از بحث مایکل که پیسه از بود مسائل رسمی از بود آنچه که در اسناد آراق نگاشته شده درست است که برای طالبان فرضیه نمیشه، ولی نسبت غیر مستقیم طالبان را همکاری میکنه. منابعی را که من پیشتر کوتاه اشاره کردم، طالبان فروش خارجی را که از طریق از اون ثبات قیام که هدف اصلی بانک مرکزی است، اگر دسترسی به ذخایر ارزی نداشته باشن چطور مدیریت بدون شک که پول در دسترسشان قرار میگیره، ولی نه از اینکه پای پول قسمی که ما در گذشته پول می‌آمد از طریق ART بانک جهانی زیر قیمت وزارت مالیه بود و در حساب پیش بانک مرکزی، ولی آلی پول درست برای بانک مرکزی نمیره، اما اون پول برای بانک AIB میره که با دو طریق از طریق تسعیر اسعار خارجی یا دلار و افغانی دور میخوره بازار افکت میکنه. و دیگه یکی بیشتر من اشاره کردم آقای یا که اعلام کرده که پیسه رو نکشه رو سر فورن کرنسی یا اسعار خارجی شرایط سخت داره که وضع ساخته که باعث شده که و اقتصاد کوچک شده و در قسمت بحث شرایط در the literature on the aid is evolving. And I'm not an anthropologist, but I can take you to a very good article by Ashna talking about Vietnam case. There's a very good comparison why aid money was a success in Vietnam and why it was not a success in Afghanistan. And the argument is because of the homogeneity of the society. It's very anthropological. In Vietnam, one nation, one society, no differences, no problems, no things as such. Whereas in the context of Afghanistan, so you have all these heterogeneity, and of course an escalating war, and of course the difficult regional neighbors, actors, and those sort of things that is causing. And I think there's a lot about aid frontierism. I don't want to go to the literature because people are just talking about the aid because we have been a recipient of aid. And if we were a natural resources kind of country, then we would have been in a better position, just like Iran, like other Middle East countries. But aid has that cost. Happy or unhappy, it will have that cost. And then final thing, with the rubble, there is a lot of literature emerging. With the Taliban takeover, there's a very dominant literature is emerging with regards to rubble to state transition. And I have learned from many other insurgent groups in Middle Eastern countries that they have been inspired by the Taliban because they say we can take the government and they can.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zeb. Thank you, everyone. Well, we can conclude as long as the Taliban are there, they will continue to come with not having any economic system or anything else. Afghans do have to rely on foreign aid, and we do rely. Not that we support or that others don't have questions about it. Thank you so much, everyone. We conclude our panel right here. We will take a short break, and we'll come back.